Welcome to The Ripple, where extraordinary women executives get real about their career journeys. This season, thanks to our partnership with GNW Consulting, you'll hear even more stories from women leaders about how they're building visibility for themselves, their careers, and their companies. I'm your host, Ashley Lobbs, and today we're joined by the thoughtful Kim Peretti, Chief Customer Officer at Restaurant 365. She's sharing how mentorship gave her the confidence to own her expertise. Kim, I'm so glad to have you. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, Ashley, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I want to hear a bit about your journey going from being a leader inside of a company to really speaking up for yourself and creating visibility in your industry. What did that look like for you?
Oh, I think for me, I had a ton of support from mentors along the way who gave me confidence when I didn't have it. So I didn't come out into this. I'm, currently a CCO. I've been a CCO before and I've been in leadership positions, but I didn't just get here because I decided one day that I could be more confident. In fact, I think back to my journey, and what stands out to me is people along the way from even very early in my career who believed in me, who gave me a chance and helped me build my confidence. And when things didn't go well, we're there to coach and provide mentorship and say, how does that change your trajectory going forward? And it wasn't just one person, but I was blessed to meet a number of people and also just have an amazing family. My dad has 4 daughters and 1 son. And my dad had an enormous impact on not only myself, but my 3 sisters in terms of, you can do and be anything, speak up for yourself, be sure you can take care of yourself, you have a voice. So the combination of really incredible people, colleagues, both professional colleagues, but colleagues in some of the volunteer work I did, and then also family.
It's so wonderful to have a supportive family that from a young age sets you up to believe in yourself. And it sounds like, you had that and you still had some struggles that you had to get through.
Oh, sure.
What was it that you really needed from these mentors? Like, what was it that you didn't feel confident about?
So I think there's a good news, bad news. I think I was very early on. I was an early reader. I think intellectually, I showed promise. And so there were expectations, and I would typically meet those expectations, and those went right through my education. But there are dynamics in the workforce. And I tell my kids who are now in the workforce, the hardest thing about work isn't necessarily the actual work. It's navigating the dynamics of the unwritten rules, the personalities. Everybody comes to work bringing their full bag of everything that's going on in their lives and navigating the politics, all of those things. So that's really where I think I was naive, and then realized I didn't really understand how do things operate? How do decisions get made? How do people get their agendas put forward? How do people get promoted? I would see things like that person didn't actually come up with that. Their peer did, and they got, oh, what are they doing? So all of these dynamics that I was very naive. And I think those were some of the things I learned from people around me, was just how do you navigate? How do you learn these unwritten rules? How do you read those tea leaves? And once you start to build that muscle, I think it creates a level of confidence. I think the other thing is that combination of that and also having some mastery of the things that you do and it being successful also helps accelerate some of that confidence and influence you start to leverage.
What I think is so fascinating is that you started by talking about your experience in school. And I think this is so relevant because when we are in school, there are these curriculums that are designed to align learning expectations.
Yes.
With a reasonable pace, with your development, right? And so when you're growing up, there is this expectation that you're going to be able to do the things that you're being taught in school. And then when you do them and when you do them well, you're rewarded for meeting those expectations. And that's such a different thing when you get into the workforce because not all of those expectations are reasonable. Not all of those expectations are designed to progress with your ability to like learn and integrate into an
Yes.
environment. Not all of those expectations are healthy. And it's a huge shift when you've been rewarded in in very developmental years in your life. You've been rewarded for meeting expectations. And suddenly, if like you will just absolutely sacrifice yourself if you continue to operate that way and try to gain approval by meeting people's expectations.
Yes, and for anyone early in their career, if you know me, I was the yes person. I was the fixer. I, about 5 years ago, for about 3 years, had an executive coach because I still hadn't completely gotten that out of my system. Was I should be able to solve any problem, feeling extreme ownership of it. So it does linger on, but I've found over the years that I've been able to take some of the other direction and feedback and incorporate it so it wasn't as extreme, but it still lingered underneath, which was I'm responsible for everything. I'm accountable for everything. It has to work. Like to your point, I have to get an A. When
Yeah, I have to get an A in life. Yeah.
in reality, you're going to make mistakes. Things are not going to be linear. There are going to be other people and organizational dynamics that change things regardless of what you do. And those are all the learning things that I think I needed to do in order to get to where I am today and feel the way I do about who I am and what impact I can have.
How did it feel in the course of your career to go from this very performance minded approach where your value was about being able to do things well, anticipating and fixing problems, meeting people's expectations, you know, going from that to being yourself and peeling back some of those expectations and taking the good from it and leaving the rest behind.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did that feel like a risk to you?
Yes, but I'll tell you this story because I'll never forget the conversation I was having. It was with my boss. He was a fairly new boss. I was at Adobe, and I had been working there probably 90 days or so. We're doing a check-in,
Mhm.
and he's still one of my favorite people. He'll know who he is. I don't have to say it. He looked at me. He said, Kim, do you think you're enough? And I
Oof.
was, what? I had never had anyone ask me that. And he said, because you are. And you're doing a great job. You're successful. Do you think you're successful? And I'm like, whoa, these are really big questions. And I said, I guess so. He goes, wow. I think you got to rethink that a little bit. And we developed a quasi mentoring and support relationship. He was a really high performance, high expectation leader. At the same time, was so crisply able to see people for who they are and how they operated and just guide them. And he was really, those moments were an inflection point for me to start a process of realizing that what I did was enough and it didn't always have to be as the fixer or the solution. And I didn't have to always own it. And that was a turning point for me, and that's changed the trajectory of how I work today.
No kidding. How did it make you feel? Like, were you uncomfortable? Was
Oh,
that,
I think I had a tear in my eye.
yeah.
Um, because I think most importantly, and he's an incredible observer of people, and I just happen to be blessed in that I was in his sphere on a regular basis, right? Like how fortunate for me that somebody saw me, like really, really saw me and cared enough about me and my development. It was emotional.
Oh, yeah. I mean, on the most human level, to be reminded that you're enough as you are.
Yes, you're bringing value to this organization. It is enough.
Yeah.
And I can see you doing, and it would show up in different ways, right? And good and bad. And so, and I see it in a few people I'm working with who are up and coming executive, is it's okay to be quiet, to not necessarily volunteer for that, to not necessarily take that on. Don't necessarily feel like you have to be the person who solves that. You may participate, but it's okay to be thoughtful about that and consider the current conditions. And is
Yeah.
that something I need to do, to take on, to consider? Do I need to even say anything right now?
Yeah. I think when things like that come up, it's never just about work either, you
No.
know? And I'll tell you my own story with this. I was also always the person who was trying to solve every problem. I was like looking for the problems that nobody was talking about and solving them before anybody asked, always trying to do the best work, right? Because I believed that my worth was just being the best, right? And if
Right.
I wasn't the best, I wasn't worth whatever
Right.
I wanted.
Right.
And I was at this job where I was outperforming other people in my role. I maybe was outperforming my boss. And I like had these really great relationships with our clients. They were like looking to me for advice, and I felt like, oh, they're gonna notice this. They're gonna
Yeah.
see it,
Yeah.
and I'm finally gonna get my chance. I'm finally gonna be seen for what I'm doing. And at the same time, outside of work, I was in a relationship with somebody who was constantly making it my responsibility to change in order for the relationship to work. And in both of those situations, it just felt like you're going to be great. You're going to be great. This is going to be great. This is going to happen. It's just the carrot dangling out in the distance. And
Right.
I remember it wasn't a boss, it was a friend. I swing dance, and I was at a dance, and I was dancing with a friend, and he could tell like kind of these two things were converging in my life, and it was like a lot to be dealing with, and he could
Yeah.
tell that I was just not having a good time that night. And while we were dancing, he had no idea he said, "I don't know what's going on, and you don't need to tell me. I just want to tell you that you're enough." And while I'm dancing with this person, I get teary just talking about this story, but yeah, I just absolutely cried while I was dancing because I just felt like no one was telling me that. And so I didn't believe
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to figure skate too. And I think that's the other thing is depending like sometimes with sports and athletes too, that comes into the mix about being enough.
Mm, yeah,
And it's my sport was there was a lot of precision, and I should have used that as an example because you fall more than you don't. I mean, to try to do some of the things that you do, you have to be willing to take a risk and to fall. So I should have probably taken more from that, but there was something to the perfectionism of that sport that I think also underneath played something in my long-term mindset. So,
mm,
yeah, but yeah, it is interesting, isn't it, that people pick up on these things that you don't realize are outwardly being exposed. You
yeah,
don't think they are, but they are. And I think that's a really important point is when you show up, whether it be externally or internally, how you show up, people notice.
yeah, they do.
The
They don't always know
words.
why, right?
Yeah,
Like they
they
don't fully
don't.
get it, but they know something's going
Yeah.
on.
I was just coaching somebody on a presentation they were giving where they were speaking really fast and they were shaking. And I remember afterwards saying, "You're a master of your craft. What's going on there?" And they were like, "I was just waiting for somebody." And I said, "Oh gosh, you know the room, you know the people. What has gotten in there?" And it's a little bit like you're enough. I didn't
Yeah,
say that, but I was like, "That you've got this." And it's going to be really important because she was trying to pitch something and she's trying to take ownership of something and there's some dynamics. And her ability to influence the outcome in her direction it's going to be imperative that she find a way to build that confidence in order to influence the outcome she's looking to drive. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and what did it look like for you? Look, what are some examples of when you started really owning your mastery and also just yourself, just being yourself more at work? Well, how did that show up for you?
For me, I became more, in some ways, introverted, believe it or not,
Mm.
in
Mhm.
that I became more thoughtful, more data driven. I was more prepared, and I was better at my work. I was better at my job. And so, went through a pandemic with a company. It's probably the most rewarding work I've ever done. And it was chaotic. We went from, seeing through 3,000 new customers a quarter to like 18,000. Like,
Whoa.
yes. And I think about how I was operating differently. I had a coach. I actually had great leadership, and I had started to make real incremental changes. And I remember just having the time to look at what was going on macro, be thoughtful about what are the conditions in 20, this was like April or May, June, July,
So
somewhere
really early.
like, it might have been a little bit further because we went through a quarter. That's why I knew we had 18,000. So maybe August or September, but we're still on this trajectory. And I remember gathering not only information about our customers, but coming back and saying, I spent some time talking to people. I had some connections in the federal government and in healthcare. And I actually put a whole trajectory together around here's where we are and how we're servicing those customers. And we triaged it because we
Hmm.
never expected to be in this situation. I worked for a COVID company that saw this boon. And then I said, but I think there's another wave coming. And here's what I think our customers and the business is going to need. And I think my old self, and people were like, oh, and it got absorbed and into diagrams and the executive meetings and so forth. We changed some of how we were going to work. I don't know that I would have done that kind of thoughtful due diligence and strategic thinking if I was still just trying to be the best one and get the things done that would make me look productive and successful, 5 years before that. And so that's how it shows up at work is really having a moment. I did this yesterday. Someone gave me feedback today, which was somebody asked a question about something very tactically, and I thought about it. And she even said to me today, you were very quiet. And I said, yep, I was thinking about really what would be the best way to approach that ask. And my answer was much more strategic and comprehensive than just trying to answer a very tactical question that wouldn't get us anywhere. So
Yeah.
that's how it shows up. And I know people can say, well, sometimes you just need an answer. And the answer is yes. Under certain situations, I just have to give an answer. I have to make a decision. But at this level, at a C level, even at a VP level, a learning for all of us is to just I see it with my own VPs, and I've seen it with my VPs and my SVPs, is taking the time to think through where are you going? How are you going to get there? What's it going to take to do that? How do you bring, whether it's 50 people or 5,000 people, with you on that journey? And being thoughtful and taking the time to consider those things. I don't know that we do that well.
Right.
But that's one thing that I have found has evolved for me.
Well, what I'm hearing from that is that for you, the difference was being less attached to the outcomes, right? Not seeing the outcomes as an evaluation of your worthiness or character, right?
Yeah.
And when you were able to detach yourself from needing to look the most productive, do the best job, be the person who's like executing the solution, right? And just kind of this like treading water emotionally,
Mm-hmm.
when you were able to let go of that, it really sounds like you were able to sit back and see things more clearly and objectively.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's true. And I mean that from a really interesting place, which is I think when you go from individual contributor to manager to director to senior director to VP, there's an evolution in how tactical and how hands-on you are. But what I have found, and I think the dynamics of working have changed, particularly if you're in a very fast growth company, is everybody is in the tactics. So I worked for a company that went from 700 million to 2.5 billion in 4.5 years. I went from a company that was making about 4.5, 500 million to 900 million in 2 years. And so the way you operate in those environments, even as a leader, can be this output, constant triage. It's part of being late stage startup. And I went through in-depth IPO, right? And so it's very much this fast, rigorous, hurry up, make a decision, pace. And I think finding time even with those and within those environments, if you're in a slower growing industry that makes decisions less quickly, like I think of academia perhaps, this may seem like, well, of course you do that. You're an executive. But I think the dynamics of at least the industry I work in and in the environments I've been in, it hasn't always been conducive to be thoughtful, to be quiet, to think and actually find the value in that versus move, and just get on with it. So I just want to caveat that because it can seem a little like, well, of course you would do that as a C-level executive. There's a lot going on at the executive level in the dynamics in which I worked in that I would say are less strategic and thoughtful and more like fire drills.
Right, of course. And I think that's one of the things that makes it uncomfortable to so many women leaders to be in the spotlight specifically is that they're afraid of that vulnerability, right?
Yeah, I think everybody is. I think everybody is. I think one of the biggest opportunities we have as women is to be more confident in taking risks and making decisions. And if you can get a little bit more information and time to be thoughtful about those, you may still have to move fast. But someone once said this to me, it stayed with me for 20 years now, is no decision is worse than a bad or good decision. And I tell my team all the time, Brene Brown has this famous quote. I like it. It's called courage over comfort and
Mm-hmm.
taking risks is making decisions and making sometimes fast decisions is important. The organization as an executive languishes when there is inattention to things that need to be either pushed forward or fixed or addressed. And it does make us vulnerable. But as I tell up and coming leaders, this is the job. The buck stops with us. And so
Yeah,
if you don't like that, you can be a principal or a fellow individual contributor. This may not be the role for you either. There are other ways to be extraordinary without necessarily being the executive. And I
right.
find in my observations, it's one of the biggest kind of aha moments for people is like, holy smokes. Okay, I've got to make that decision. I'm going to be accountable for that. And then different dynamics and behaviors can show up if that's not something you feel good or comfortable doing.
Absolutely. I love highlighting how, sitting in that discomfort for too long can lead you to the
Oh,
worst decision, which is no decision at all.
parenting and leadership are not that different. And if you think about like not addressing just very simply a child's behavior or situation for a long extended period of time, that's not good for anybody, and particularly the child. And while the organization and certainly the people are not children, I think there are a number of similarities to the organization is looking to you for direction. And if it's something's broken, helping find a solution, getting a solution to it if it's pervasive, or if it's an opportunity advocating and spearheading that opportunity for the organization to improve or create other opportunities. I see it over and over again when I come into new organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Is one of the first things people tell me as well. Nobody ever made a decision about that. Well, why didn't they?
Right.
I don't think they felt comfortable, and there were people who didn't like it. And okay, my next commentary would be, let's start to shop the halls. That's my favorite saying, which is, let's go talk to some people, find out why don't they like it, what are the risks. Let's get some data. Let's be thoughtful and put something together and have another try at it. Like somebody
Yeah.
new in here too. Yeah.
So often that conversation stops as soon as we learn that somebody's uncomfortable. That ends the
Yes.
conversation.
Yes.
That becomes the dead end, and we have to take a turn. And I
Yeah.
love that you're suggesting, hey, let's dig deeper into that and figure out what are the risks that you're perceiving, what is causing this discomfort. That's a really powerful thing, I think, to help people get more comfortable taking risks, because sometimes the risk of making a decision is just understanding other people's perception of those risks, right?
Right. And outside of really egregious risk, like what's the worst thing that's going to happen?
Yeah, most things can be undone.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes for women, I'll say this about women, myself first and foremost, is we want to be liked. We don't want anyone to be mad at us. We don't want anyone to think we're not collaborative or cooperative. And the minute I'm talking about myself years ago, the minute someone decided they didn't like something or maybe were upset with me, I wilted.
Mm.
Oh no, how do I win them back?
Right? Well, it comes back to what you were saying earlier about, being enough.
Yeah.
And I think when you remember that you're enough, you don't need everyone to like you.
No, you don't. But I think it's something that's learned and socialized,
Of course.
with women more than men. And we have to find that right balance of being assertive, but perhaps not aggressive, of being kind, but not being weak, of being
Mhm.
articulate, but not too emotional. It's like, okay, let me walk the wire, I've
Right.
seen.
And not making it our imperative to be liked over our imperative to lead.
Yes. Yes, there's a way to do both and to be okay with a little bit of friction in the system.
Yeah. I think that's such an important lesson for people to be reminded of, because I'm sure they're coming up against that tension all the time. I hear that in your story. I certainly feel it in mine. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners too. So I want to
Yes.
thank you so
Yes.
much for joining us and sharing your experience. I know I'm going to be thinking about this a lot today. It's been such a pleasure talking to you.
You too, Ashley. Thank you so much.
Now that we're at the end of today's episode, we hope you'll reflect on how Kim's story might inspire your own. And I'm going to steal the questions directly from her mentor here because I think they're so good. Do you feel like you're enough? Do you feel like you are successful? If today's show inspired you to think of an extraordinary woman leader in your life, let her know about the Wednesday Women Executive Membership. It's a safe space for women leaders to tackle any challenge, ask questions, and uplift others. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Your ratings help us grow and inspire even more people. Thank you to our Season 2 sponsor, GNW Consulting, to our executive producers, Melissa Moody and Leslie Greenwood, and to our technical producer, Yelena Georgievich, with Kind Media Productions. I'm your host, Ashley Lobbs, hoping this small ripple creates a big wave in your life. Until next time.